Hi, welcome to the Stop Depression Summit. I'm Anatoly Glaskov, the co-host of the summit. At the summit, we address the topic of depression and present current information about depression to everyone who wants to be able to improve the quality of their lives and help others to do so in everyday life and in their professional activities. We pay special attention to effective methods of dealing with this condition and helping those in need. And now, along with John Callis, we're going to talk about, can a person deal with the depression on their own? John Callis is an award-winning writer, Emmy-nominated director and producer who has helped to create over 100 titles. Also, John is a mental health expert. His articles on mental health topics were picked up by Vox, Yahoo Finance, Digital Journal, the Good Men's Project, etc. John holds a master's degree from Occidental College and is a member of the Directors Guild of America. John had the opportunity to work with notable actors including Mel Gibson, Walter Matthau, Jack Nicholson, Madonna, Eddie Murphy, and Mel Brooks. His work can be seen in projects for HBO, the Disney Channel, Showtime, the Broadway play Phantom of the Opera, and the 1993 redesigned TriStar logo. John, thank you very much for being with us today and welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here.
Excellent. So the first question is, in what cases it is possible to cope with depression on your own?
Well, I think we have to define that. There's a difference between being clinically depressed, medically depressed, or just plain depressed. Someone who is just depressed has to deal with a specific situation and try to move through it. Just because you wake up feeling depressed doesn't necessarily mean you need medical attention. If you try to get through the day and you still find you're still struggling with something, then you may need to reach out and get some professional help from a mental health expert. The difference really is in trying to identify the difference between just having a bad day, which we all do, and whether or not this depression is going to be lingering. They both have value.
Thank you. And how does one come about noticing these differences? Does one need to go and do some further research on their own, or?
Well, there's an old adage. When you wake up in the morning, if you look and you say, I'm feeling depressed, okay, so you deal with that. The next morning, if it's the second thing on your mind, then you say, let's see what's going on. The third day, if it's the third or fourth thing on your mind, you have now identified that there's a process of understanding that this isn't a clinical or medical emergency and that you are showing progress towards healing. Now, if you wake up and you come to the point where you have all these questions that are unanswered and you can't find answers to them and it's starting to frustrate you and get you into depression, then it's time to seek medical help.
How many doctors do you need to go through to understand who to go with?
That is a great question. I think that's one of the biggest challenges for anyone that's dealing with mental health. How do you trust somebody with your brain, basically? I don't know you. Why am I opening up to you? So I think it's important to go into any of these meetings with doctors with a list of questions that are important to you. For example, do you see a path? And if so, what is it to helping me get over my mental health? Is there a process that you do, or how do you cater it to me as an individual? Because therapists don't always approach every client the same way. So it's important for you to feel comfortable with the therapist or professional that you're working with. Otherwise, it's just never going to happen because you won't feel safe to open up.
I see. At which point do you think it's necessary? There is a need to seek qualified help, John.
Well, I think what's important is you have to look inside yourself and say, can I get through this myself? Do I have the tools? Have I tried everything? But if you keep finding that you're getting more questions than answers, and you've come to the end of the point where nothing's making sense and you just keep going into depression, then it's time to say, I need to reach out. I need to find help. Now, that is the hardest part, especially for men, because we've been raised in this country, certainly, to be men. And we're not allowed to show our feelings because men don't cry. And now that the paradigm is shifting, men are now allowed to talk about their feelings. And so we seek help with professionals. So it's important to find somebody you're very comfortable with.
Who would be the first person you would talk to if you encountered yourself being in this situation?
Well, truthfully, for me, it would be myself. I know it sounds silly, but I'd sit down and say, look, are you having a bad day? Are you really depressed? What is it that's depressing you? I mean, so you have to start to uncover these difficult situations you're facing and then come up with a path to resolve them. So I think the first step would be, if you know somebody who's gone through this type of thing, go to them and say, what was your process? What did you learn from it? How did you get over this? Did you get over it? And what was the process of getting somebody to help you? So talking about it, I think, is the key number one factor. Being willing to talk about it is essential.
You wrote men having challenges. How do they open up?
The challenges?
Yeah, because men, they can't share. Well, it's hard for them to share their feelings. And so how do they come closer to being themselves more and being, let's say, vulnerable?
That's to have a man become vulnerable is, first, he has to recognize that he has an issue. Second, he has to find it in himself to be willing to talk about it. So if he has a wife or a best friend, or a teacher or a soccer coach or any sports coach, it's good to talk to them and say, I'm kind of struggling with this feeling and I'm not sure what to do with it. It's very challenging because of the ingrained cultural training that men have, that we are not allowed to show our emotions. So in today's society, there are multiple ways of seeking help. There are great institutions, there are great doctors, and there are great self-help tools that I will later in the broadcast here explain, the one I created for people to use. So there are tools to be effective to try to self-diagnose yourself. But if you get to the point where it's just too much, then, as I say, reach out to people who have been through it and talk to your parents, talk to your girlfriend, your wife, your husband, your friend, anybody that may have been through it, and find out that you truly aren't alone and that this issue is not going to go away unless we get help.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Have you had something of your own to share? Some kind of time where you felt down?
Yes. For me, it started with childhood trauma when my dad died when I was 3. Um, I felt abandoned. I slipped into depression, and then years later, it got so bad with my behavior, I was sent to a military school. I didn't get any better. And I think one of the cathartic moments was the day that I thought, this ends. So I jumped into an icy lake, and as the water filled my lungs, I just realized it was a bad decision and I didn't want to die. So the message was clear. I needed help and I needed to find a way to do that. And so I started to look around and figure out how to create um, anything that would help me. So a coach finally got me to play soccer, and I had never played because I didn't have a dad. And he got it out of me and said, look, there's a healthy thing in sports because you're part of a team and you'll get outside of your head. So he encouraged me. So I think the dynamics of that were very helpful. And going through an attempted suicide and surviving it was a moment of change for me. And that really woke me up. I don't recommend it, but it woke me up.
If our listeners, they do have children, of course, and if you would be sharing something from your personal experience going through this, what would be your message to parents to catch their kids, not catch their kids, but to watch their kids to see if there are any changes towards depression or suicidal thoughts? Because it's with social media, for example, it's a big topic, right?
Yes.
What message would you have for parents?
Well, there are warning signs that your child is in stress. If you find them coming home and they're mopey and they're going into the rooms and closing the doors, that's not a good sign. I think for parents, though, it's very difficult to come out of the parental view of saying, here's what you need to do. You need to make friends. You need to do this. You need to do that. You need to stop doing that. Stop talking and start listening to your children. You mentioned social media. I think it's one of the most dangerous places for a child to be. because the metrics of self-worth is all about how many followers that child has. So if they don't have followers or they're getting bullied online, their whole world starts collapsing and they withdraw. So at dinner, you might find your child just eating very lethargically. And the worst thing you can say is, hey, come on, let's have some fun, snap out of it. What's the matter? I think the way to approach it is everything okay? Is there anything you want to talk about? Because I'm here to listen. And once they get secure that you're willing to listen, then you have an opportunity to start healing. Um, I've dealt with that in my own life with my own son, who was diagnosed with clinical depression. And I made a lot of mistakes by trying to help him as opposed to listening to him. And once I started listening to him and acknowledging him and letting him feel that he's been heard and seen, he started opening up to me. And then we started to unravel what was bothering him. And now I'm helping through all of the crises that he is confronting.
Thank you. If there would be someone listening to you, or somebody would hear your pain at the time when you were growing up, what would be different if there was someone like you being able to listen to you?
Well, hopefully it would have shortened the time that I was depressed and the struggles I was going through. And perhaps I would have felt like, okay, maybe I'm not so unique in my pain. There are other people who've experienced this and I can learn from them. Uh, it's tough when you don't have a support system. So if I did have a stronger support system, I think it would have shortened it. For example, when my math teacher got a hold of me I think towards the end of high school, he realized something wasn't quite right. And he sat me down and we chatted and he got it out of me as well. And he said, I have a feeling you'd be very good at math. And I said, why math? He says, because unlike other things that are subjective and have opinions, math doesn't have an opinion. 1 + 1 will always equal 2, and nobody can argue with you. So you can be secure that 1 and 1 is always 2. And it resonated for some reason. That one little example resonated with me. And I got so into math that I became an A student, took advanced trigonometry and calculus and all this, and found a reward. I found something I felt good about, and I started a bit of healing. So I think that that's what's important, is to find those steps to heal.
Thank you. Do you think depression can go away on its own?
Well, honestly, I'm going to answer it. I think that's a question for a medical expert to answer. But what I can say is that there are different spectrums of depression that you can look at. If you're looking at depression from the inside, I'm depressed, I'm depressed, I'm depressed, yeah, then you definitely need some help. But if you're able to look at depression from the outside and see that you recognize and own that you're depressed, then you can start doing a healing process by finding things that make you less depressed. Take a walk, organize your closet, read a book, call friends, get together, but stay off social media, because that's where you can start imploding. As a matter of fact, Generation Z right now are starting to use flip phones because they're feeling liberated away from all the social media, and they're feeling less stress and anxiety. So I think it's important to keep focused on what makes you happy. Use the tools. If you've gone to therapy, use those tools. The tool I will explain in a bit, use it if it helps. There is no one answer for everybody, but there is an answer out there for you.
Thank you. You wrote the book, When the Rain Stops. Can you touch us? Why did you write it?
Well, a couple of reasons. First, it was my journey, and certainly I wanted people to understand that the journey I went through can be a lesson and a blueprint for them to understand how to deal with depression, how to get through it, and understand that depression, anxiety, stress do not have to be things that ruin or define your life. So what I did is I wrote the journey about the boy, myself, being very young and going through what he was going through, but from his perspective. So I had to rip off a lot of Band-Aids and go through a lot of pain to relive that. But then there's a little gray area in the book that explains the adult looking back at the experience the little boy had, and quite well, always the perspective was different. And so I'm hoping people can learn from it. One client I had read the book, and after he read it, he went over, picked up the phone, and called his mother, who he hadn't spoken to in 10 years. And he's elated that she's now in his life. So I'm using the book as a tool for people to use, a healing process, and one that there are some life lessons in there that we could all use. And if that helps somebody, then that's the mission I'm on, and that's what I want to do. Is I just want to help people understand that there is hope and there is light at the end of the tunnel, and you don't have to stay in depressed mode for the rest of your life.
Thank you. Have you had those thoughts where you asked yourself, well, why am I doing this? There are hundreds and thousands of books on the topic of depression. Why there should be another one? Did you have these thoughts, and how did you deal with them?
Yes, I did have those thoughts, and I looked at a lot of them, and quite a few of them, if not most of them, come from a therapeutic or medical background. I come from a different viewpoint. I come from an experiential background. I speak the language of the depressed person, so people reading the book will understand and get it. It's like, I'm not trying to offer advice. I'm not trying to be a therapist. I'm not trying to give them the magical pill or anything. But what I am trying to say is, I went through it. I know what you're going through. So here's some tools to deal with it. One of the tools that I mentioned in my book is a tool called Uncover, Discover, and Recover. And what that means is you uncover any difficult situation you're having. So once you see that you're having a difficult situation, if you take a step back and look at it, you say, okay, that's the situation I'm facing. Now, let's take a uncover it. You're now going into discovery, which is your perception of that situation the truth, or can you look at it from another viewpoint and see maybe there's an alternative truth, which is why there are two voices in my book. And then the recovery part is, now that you've gone through the uncover discover phase, the recovery is taking steps to move yourself forward. Regardless of what they are, you'll find them for yourself, but some include maybe seeking therapy, maybe finding books that you enjoy, talking to friends, getting off social media, watching movies that make you laugh. So there are tools that can really work, and I think this is one of them.
And you said to take a step back. How does one do that? How does one pull themselves out of, well, the funk they found themselves in?
I think that's a great question. In order to pull yourself back, you have to practice this tool quite a bit. Nothing's going to come automatically. You don't walk into a therapist's office and after one session, you're healed. So I think if you take a deep breath and say, I need to calm my mind down for a minute, I need to go for a walk and get away from this for a minute and start to think about other things, just clear your head out, then you might be able to come back and look at it with fresh eyes and fresh ears and fresh thoughts. And once you can do that, then you start developing the skill set in order to do it. So when you're confronted with this in a public setting or a private setting, and you start feeling anxiety, you now have a tool to say, okay, take a deep breath. Nobody knows what you're thinking. So just relax and see what the truth is. The truth is, I'm having a really hard time right now. Why am I having a hard time? And how do I deal with it? Well, I'm going to deal with it not by addressing it and getting into a big kerfuffle about it, but instead, if somebody says something to me, I'm going to smile and try to find humor in it, as opposed to, is this an attack on me personally? Why are they laughing at me? You know, all these things that go through our minds. So when you start to do that, then you're taking the power away from depression and anxiety and putting the power into you discovering how to deal with it and move forward.
So basically, the question that I had is, how can you effectively support yourself in this state? Is what are like small 1, 2, 3 steps that one can do to shift their perspective once they found themselves in this state?
Well, as I mentioned, uncover, discover, recover.
Pinch themselves, like the first one, or look aside, right? Like, what do you consciously do?
Well, I think the first step is, like we talked about before, is you have to recognize that you're in that situation. Now, if you have the opportunity, walk out of the house, go for a walk, and clear your mind. You know, the steps are breathing, you know, go 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. But there's another part of this that we often forget. For example, grieving. If you lose somebody, there are 7 steps to grieving. Not every step is in order. So you're going to grieve differently than the next person. So you have to find out how you're going to grieve and how you're going to overcome that kind of trauma, basically. And over time, you find that you're not going to forget the person that you love. And there are times when triggers come up and you're going to cry and you're going to be so in much pain because you miss them. But then one day you're going to see a picture of them. Instead of it triggering tears, you start laughing and thinking about some fun moments that you had with them. So when you are in crisis, it's important if you can take a step back. One of the steps is to start thinking about the times that were fun. If you're having a problem with this person, a person, for example, stop and think, this isn't worth a big deal right now because I love this person so much. I may have misunderstood them. So I'm going to think about a time we were all laughing together and get past it that way. If you get in an argument with your spouse, my wife and I have a deal that we're allowed to say, look, I'm too upset right now to talk about this, and I need to go clear my head out. So I go take a walk, or she takes a walk, or we separate ourselves, calm down to a point where the emotion's not talking anymore. We can actually talk from a base of, here's how I feel. This is what it felt like to me. And you own it for yourself, but you don't deny the other person by saying, this is what you did. You don't do that because then you're putting all of it on them, and that's not fair to them. And it's not fair to you because if you own it, then you can resolve it. If you don't own it, you'll never resolve it.
It seems to me that you have to train your mind to think a certain way whilst you are in this condition, depression condition. You have to retrain your mind because you're there and you say, look, this is how we are going to think. Step 1, step 2, step 3, and keep on doing the same thing until you build a habit. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying. And yes, you're dead right in saying that. And the tools can be uncover, discover, recover. It can be a tool that your therapist gave you, or it can be another tool that you read. You have to find the tool that works for you because it's out there and you just have to find it.
Thank you. What would be the advice you would like to share to people who are in the state of depression right now?
My advice is this. I've often talked to clients about depression has what I call a comfort zone. And a comfort zone is where the person goes and I'll use this as an example, locks themselves in a room and starts playing video games or does activities that make them feel safe. They're away from the outside world. There's nothing that's going to harm them. Nobody can say anything that triggers anything. And so they become comfortable and they relax within that safety zone. Now, that on the outside sounds, wow, they found something comfortable. It is the most dangerous place to be because once you get so comfortable with that, how do you now talk yourself out of that and start reacclimating yourself back to life? And those steps are the hardest ones to do. And the first step is obviously saying, how do I get out of my comfort zone? It's an analogy is a predator is chasing a rabbit or something. The rabbit runs inside the hole and gets into his comfort zone. Now, inside there, he feels safe and secure, but he also knows there's danger outside. Now he comes to a fork in the road saying, I'm not going out there because I know I'd be in danger. But if I don't go out there, I'm going to starve to death. So what are my choices? Do I venture back out? Do I look around and see if it's safe? Anybody coming? And venture back out into life and take care of myself. Same with the room, as the example I use. You have to think, how am I going to step out that door and deal with what's on the other side? How am I going to deal with what I perceive the world hating me and me hating it? How do I change that paradigm? What do I do to make these things happen? So you'd start with baby steps and you start going outside your room and maybe you come around the neighborhood for a bit. You go for a walk and maybe just talk to a stranger because there's nothing that that stranger can say or do to harm you because there's no investment there. So you start trying different things like that and see what's working. If that doesn't work, then don't do it. The most important thing is do not do things that make you uncomfortable. Find the steps that make you comfortable and work for you.
Thank you. And it seems that it's all about breaking the cycle, breaking the pattern that you found yourself in and developing a new one.
Yes, a lot of people often speak of life as the path. The problem with the word path for me is it makes it feel like it's inevitable. It's predestined. You're going to be depressed. You're on this path. You're going to be depressed. Look, let's be honest. Life has bumps. There's always going to be hiccups, and life just happens. So instead of being on a path, you have to find the journey so that you can own the depression and not let it own you. So once you're able to look on the outside instead of looking from the inside, then you then take the power back for yourself and begin to heal.
John, do you mind sharing one of your clients' experience working with you and what was going on in their journey with you?
Happy to. A young woman called me, my client, and said, I'm really in crisis. I said, okay, let's back up here. When you say you're in crisis, what does that mean to you? And she said, I am literally freaking out. I have no idea why. I'm just, everything I look around, I start crying. I can't handle it. I'm shaking. And I said, what were you doing today? And she goes, what do you mean? I said, let's backtrack. Where was it when the first trigger happened? What were you doing prior to that? Were you happy? And she goes, it was okay. Everything was okay. But then all of a sudden she said, well, I started watching this movie and it kind of reminded me of my mother. And then she started crying again. So the first thing we did in the Uncover, Discover, Recover is we uncovered the trigger, which was that her mom had passed away many years ago, and she still was dealing with it, but in a non-emotional state on a daily basis. But when a trigger happened, like this movie, it brought up all these things. So I said, okay, so we've uncovered that. Now let's discover what it is that's the truth here. The truth is what? And I don't offer answers. I try to pose questions and get my clients to heal themselves, because if they learn that tool for themselves, then they don't need me after a while and they can use it as part of their background. And she goes, well, you know, when my mom was alive, I could talk about this and that and this. I said, okay, let's talk about this, that, and this. So she brought up one thing, and I said, what are you feeling about that? I mean, what would your mom have said? She goes, well, I would ask her, and she would always have this wise comment. I said, well, throw the question out. So she threw it out, and I said, I can give you my perspective. I don't know if it's your mom's, but I can give you my perspective, and we can talk about that. So we did this about 3, 4, 5 times. And all of a sudden she started laughing. And I said, what happened? She goes, I just felt like my mother came through you, because everything you said would have been what my mother said. And I said, well, I'm a parent. And I think all I came from is a space of love. And I listened to you, and I offered what I would offer you as my child. And I'm really happy that it helped you. Now, what are your steps in recovering? And she said, I think I need to go back and grieve more because I don't feel that I've done enough of it. Is that okay? And I said, it's essential. It's not okay. It's essential. You must complete your grieving process. And by the way, my dad died when I was 3. And sometimes I get triggered and I think about him and I start crying. But the difference is I don't stay in that space. I allow myself to have the feeling, but then I recover by saying, okay, what are some happy thoughts? What is it that makes me who I am today? And how did I get there and all that? And she just could not stop thanking me. And I said, uncover, discover, recover. She said, John, I'm going to use that more and more and more. And I thank you. And when we hung up, I felt really good that she had embraced the fact that she could take a look at that and understand what was really the core root. And I think she probably went off the phone and started looking at pictures and cried her eyes out and kind of got it out of her system a bit.
Thank you. John, I wanted to ask you a question on what's happening inside of you whilst you're working with the client. Do you see pictures of what to say next, or how do you come up with solutions? Like, for example, being the voice of her mother. How do you have a process that you go and execute certain things, or do you just naturally follow your intuition? How does it work?
I think you said a couple of very valuable things. Intuition is one thing. Earlier in this meeting, we talked about being a parent. The main thing is to not talk, but to listen. So what I've learned to do for myself is to listen without trying to figure out what I want to say to that person. So that person may ask me 3 or 4 different questions, which I may or may not remember all of them, but I'm not going to start answering those questions in my head because then I'm not listening anymore. And I've taken myself out of the position to be of service and help to that person. So when they're finished talking, something inside of me just says it. I don't know where it comes from, but I just can only say what I'm feeling from my own experience. And I do qualify that I'm not a therapist, but here's what my experience was, and here's what it sounds like you're having. Does that resonate? And then we talk and still discover more and then come up with steps to recover.
Thank you. How does one stay away from giving advices, being the consultant in the situation?
I think for me, I don't know how other people do it. I found advice can be a very dangerous and slippery slope. Because if you give the wrong advice and they slip further into depression or they make an attempted suicide or something, that's on you. So for me, I never give advice. What I do is I give guidance and I give them the chance to empower themselves to work through their situation and find the path to getting some healing, whether it's professional help if they're in that much crisis, medical help if they need medication, or just a good therapist, or just talk. So whatever that comes about, I think it's critical for me not to give advice, but to be supportive.
And the last question is, how do you know when you can't help a person? You have probably met situations where you understood that they needed something else. There's something that I can't like, or what I will give them isn't going to be enough. Have you caught yourself thinking this way?
I did because one client called and said, I know we've never spoken before, but I want to talk to you about something. I said, okay, let's talk. Said, well, I've been mentally ill for the last 20 years. Now, as soon as I heard that, every flag in my head went up saying, this is not going to be a good fit because he's needing a real professional. And so he talked to him 10 minutes and he goes, so can you help me? I said, let's talk about what your issues are first. And so he told me what he was dealing with and everything. I said, do you have a therapist? He goes, yeah, but I'm not sure the therapist is working the way I want. I said, well, what is it about them that's not working? Have you asked certain questions? Have you? So I tried guiding in terms of maybe going back to the therapist and saying, we need a better structure. We need a better format. Now, in my mind, I'm hearing 20 years this person is beyond my skill set. I can offer advice, but this person really does need a professional mental health practitioner. And so at the end, I said, if your current therapist isn't meeting your needs, perhaps you might want to explore a different therapist or a different methodology in exploring therapy. Because not one therapist and not one therapeutic process is going to work for everyone. There are things where they map your brain and try to reprogram you. There's chemical induction. There's CBD. There's chat. There's so many different ways. So don't get stuck in one. If one's not working, move to another. And he said, yeah, I think I'm going to go back with some questions from my therapist. Thanks very much. And we left it at that. I did not want to say anything that could trigger this kid into a fit of suicide or further depression. I didn't want to be party to that. So I just very carefully walked away from it.
Thank you. And what should an attitude of, let's say, when a client comes to you, what should their attitude be in order to help themselves heal?
A willingness to talk, a willingness to own it, and a willingness to get over it. Now, when I say get over it, it doesn't mean like, okay, you're over it, you're out of here, done. You have to, first step is you have to be willing to talk. You also have to be willing to seek help. If you're coming to me and you want me to help guide you and assist you in your process, I'm there. But if you're coming to me with that, that's not an agenda and you just want to explore something for no reason, I'm not the guy because I'm not there to do that. I'm not a medical practitioner. So I want to support them 100%, but they have to be willing to do the work. I'm not going to do the work for them. They have to be willing to do the work. I can cite my examples of how I went and got over it. I can tell them what suicide survival means to me. We can tell them what it's like not to have a father, going to a military school where it was a harsh environment. I can tell them all these things as examples. And the end result is I'm successful and live a very happy life with a beautiful wife and 2 kids. So you can do it too. There are steps. It's not going to come overnight and it's not going to be easy. Road's bumpy. Just find the right path for yourself.
Willingness to learn and willingness to accept change and going after that.
Exactly. You have to be willing to change, because if you're not, you're wasting my time, you're wasting your time, and it's going to be frustrating for both of us.
All right. So let me think. So the first question would be, how are you fueling your career as a movie director? How is there a connection between your depression, your recovery, with your career as a movie director?
Yes, there's a definite correlation, and I'm going to share 2 things. I'd like to start with my perception about being put on a train at 12 years old to being sent to a military school. When I got on the train, my mother put me on the train, and she's standing at the station. The train started to chug away. My mother turned away and walked away. And at that moment, I thought, why does she hate me? Why am I such a bad kid that she's leaving me? She's abandoning me. And for the next several years, I felt like she hated me. So I just had nothing to do with my family. I didn't go home during vacations. I didn't want anything to do with them. I hated them. Well, later in life, when we were sort of talking, I was at my sister's house and my mother and I sat down and I said, Mom, I need to ask you questions. I need to understand some things. And she goes, I'll tell you what, I'll let you ask me anything you want, because I know it's going to be about your father, who you've always wanted answers. I'll answer them, but after that, can we please not talk about this anymore, because it's too painful for me. And that moment, I thought, oh my God, she's in a lot of pain about my father, and so many years later, but she's still suffering from it. And I said, Mom, the day you left me on the train station, you turned away, and I was scared to death. I'm 12 years old. I didn't know what I was doing. I'm on a train going from New York City to Virginia to a military school that I didn't want to go to. And she started crying. I said, I said, what's the matter? She goes, the reason I turned away, John, was I was heartbroken. I put my 12-year-old baby on a train, and I didn't want you to see me crying. And every day since that day until today, I have always been in pain about that. And my perception at that moment of my mother changed so radically that I was so grateful to have her back in my life, because I had stayed in California during Thanksgiving and Christmas by myself in my dinky little apartment, depressed because I thought I had no family. I was alone in the world. And it dawned on me that I was so loved that my mother and stepfather had to make a very difficult decision, because they didn't have the skills, excuse me, they didn't have the skills to help me, and they needed to make money to put food on the table and stuff. So they had no choice. Okay, so how does that translate into the movie business? Once I understood the paradigm that there are other ways of looking at things and you have to identify difficult situations, I thought, okay, how do I use this as a director? So one day, an actor, very famous actor, I'm not going to mention names, comes walking on the set, screaming and hollering how much better he is than another actor who they've been having this public fight about and all that, and goes in his dressing room and slams at the door. Everyone on the set looks at me and goes, good luck. Oh boy, oh boy. So I took a deep breath and I said, I can't go in there right now. So I need to think about this. What situation am I faced with? I'm faced with a couple things. One, he could disrupt the set and cause me a lot of money financially, creatively, because he's in his own head about this stuff about him being better than another actor. How am I going to get him to realize that? And what do I do to move this forward so that we can get back to what we're supposed to be doing, which is making a film? So I knocked on the door and he said, what? So I opened the door. I said, "Hi, it's me." He says, "Oh, come on in, close the door." So I came in and closed the door, and I sat down. He said, "What's up?" I said, I've been thinking about what you said when you came into the set." He goes, "Yeah." I said, "You're right." And he looked, he goes, "I'm right." I said, "Yeah, I know the guy you're talking about. He doesn't have half the skills you have. I mean, you're a consummate pro. Think about all the work you've done." I mean, and I started naming some of the films he was in and stuff. He goes, "Yeah, I was pretty good in that, wasn't I?" I said, "No, you were fantastic in it. And I want you to bring that kind of energy to what we're doing because I trust you. I believe in you. And I know you can do this." He goes, "Oh, this is going to be a cakewalk. We're going to have a great time." I said, "Great. Do you need any like coffee or anything?" He said, "No, I'm cool. And thanks for stopping in." I walked out and I was like sweating underneath. I said, "Oh God." But I got past my anxiety about it and I dealt with his instead of mine and got him comfortable because I'm not going in front of the camera. He is. So if I don't get him comfortable, it's going to show in his performance. So that's an example of how I took my own mental health and applied it on my career, and it worked out very well.
Thank you for your attention and see you in future interviews.